welcome everyone to the second session of the Let's Tell the Truth Climate Emergency Week. I'm Dr. Emily Baker, lecturer in comparative literature and Latin American studies. And I've been helping to sort of coordinate this particular week of the welcome season. So if you managed to join us yesterday for the literature short story discussion, then welcome back. It's great to see you again. And if not, then welcome in general to this week. So I just wanted to say a few words about the overview, you know, of the week. And to be honest, you know, more and more I'm thinking that the climate emergency is something we should be thinking about every day. So it's really great to have this space to sort of officially think about it and think through our position, you know, as scholars of arts and humanities, and how we use that position to have an impact on what is, you know, the greatest challenge, one of the greatest challenges facing our time, if not the greatest challenge. So just on that note, I wanted to flag up that tomorrow the roundtable that starts at 5 p.m. will bring together themes from these more specific discussions about film and literature into a kind of wider exposition and a kind of co-thinking exercise about all the ways in which UCL is already active in addressing the climate emergency, but also to sort of think through how we can do more and how you specifically can get involved in that. So speakers will include myself and Professor Florian Musknug, who both research and teach aspects of the climate emergency, and will be sort of outlining our approaches to the topic in these spheres. Dr. Lucy Bollington, a lecturer in comparative literature and film, will be presenting her co-edited book that deals with many of the key questions that we have been sort of thinking through and will continue to think through, including human, non-human entanglements and ecologies, particularly in Latin America, but I would argue, you know, with actually universal relevance. Simon Knowles will be outlining how his team works to maximise UCL's engagement with the UN's Sustainability Development Goals. So really thinking through the kind of big picture scenario of how UCL researchers across the university are engaging with the very real, tangible sort of goals that the UN has set out for us all to work towards as a sort of global community. And then last but not least, Hannah Biggs from Ucl Sustainability will be joining us. And that's the kind of, you know, both practical and strategic arm of, you know, UCL from an environmental perspective, in that they're making sure that our day-to-day activities as a sort of urban ecology in Bloomsbury and elsewhere spread across London are operating in a sustainable and sort of low impact way as possible. And she'll be showcasing some of the many different ways in which you can kind of practically get involved with that in their sort of different schemes. So please do come along tomorrow at 5 if you can, and bring a glass of wine or a glass of orange juice to sort of celebrate the end of the week as well with that. So yeah, today I'm really grateful to be joined by Dr. Debbie Martin and Lorena Televeda to kind of talk through this environmental aesthetics portion to move into the visual sphere. So if you two wouldn't mind kind of introducing yourselves and perhaps say a bit about your research and how it intersects with the broader themes of this week, that would be brilliant.
So my name is Lorena Televeda. I'm a third-year PhD student, and my research looks at Latin American women's documentary cinema of the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. So more than with the topic itself, I think I'm interested in Ursula Biermann as a filmmaker, because I think her work bridges this kind of research side with filmmaking practices in the content, but also the form. So there are lots of things that she explores in her films, like environmental issues, but also issues about borders that I'm interested in. So really looking forward to discussing the films with everyone. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you very much, Emily. I'm Debbie Martin, and I'm an associate professor in SPLAS, Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American Studies. I'm a Latin Americanist too, we all are here actually. And I've been working on film for a long time. And I'm environmentalist activism is something that I've been working on sort of more recently. I think I had a sort of climate awakening last year actually, and that started to yeah, I've started to want to incorporate that into my research. But in terms of sort of my work on film, going back a bit further, I think I've been interested for quite a long time in sort of film as a kind of means of becoming other, which I think is very relevant to the videos that we're talking about today. So I don't know, Emily, if you want me to just start. I'm going to do a brief introduction to these two videos.
Yeah, so just the general structure will be that, yeah, Debbie will say a few words of introduction about Ursula Beeman's work, and then we'll move on to the screening of Deep Weather and then Subatlantic, and then into breakout rooms sort of following that to discuss the key questions sort of to think about, which I'll post in the chat so you can start to look at those and think about those as the screenings are happening. Yeah, brilliant, Debbie, thank you.
Okay, so so the two videos that we're going to be talking about today, Deep Weather and Subatlantic, are by Ursula Beeman, who's a Swiss video essayist, installation artist, writer, curator and author, whose work engages with ecological themes. And in her videos, she tends to weave together documentary forms, documentary footage, science fiction, sometimes poetry, academic research, in order to tell stories about the changing realities of the planet. And these two videos are part of a wider project of cinematic environmentalism dealing with climate change, which also includes the videos Forest Law, which I'm also really interested in, which is about the deforestation of the Ecuadorian Amazon and indigenous people's resistance to that process. And another video called Acoustic Ocean, which explores the sounds of submarine life in Norwegian waters. So I'm going to say something quite sort of a more general introduction to these four works, which the artist calls geomorphic videos. So some of their characteristics then, they engage with the temporalities of climate change. So they foresee the future effects of actions which are happening now, the effects on the planet, the effects on sea levels, on the composition of matter and fluids. They sometimes use a device of speaking from a point in the future, or they evoke the past of a time to come. And so there's a haunting they're often in the kind that they often evoke a kind of haunting the present, the presence of the present in the past, the presence of the future in the present. They aim to create aesthetics that are, in the words of Ursula Beeman, capable of reaching our collective imaginary. So it's easy enough for us to access scientific data about the climate and the environment. There's no shortage of that. But data on its own can't help us to comprehend the scale of the changes taking place. We need art forms, narratives, and aesthetics that can help us to do this. So that's something they're engaged in trying to do. They're engaged also in trying to break down the opposition between science and art, or science and poetry, and are sort of driven by the idea that the contemporary ecological challenges require art and artists, and of course those of us who are studying art and artists and film, etc., to get involved in science, to get involved in areas which are perhaps not comfortably for us located within the realm of art and culture. These videos, another characteristic that's worth mentioning is that they affect a shift, and again I use the words of Beeman, they affect a shift in which matter, fluids and physical processes no longer provide just a dramatic backdrop for the narration of social events. Instead, the matter, the fluids and the physical processes have moved to the fore to play the leading role. So this is a shift that we're seeing more broadly in contemporary philosophy and aesthetic practices. So there's a change in the way that stories are told that these videos are part of. To quote the philosopher Bruno Latour, the decor gets up on the stage to share the story with the actors. they aim to be world making, so geomorphic. So they're thinking about and questioning the relationship between the artist and the non-human world, how we make the world through, how we make or remake the world through creating images of it. So one thing to ponder, obviously, well, we're going to move into breakout groups in a bit, and one thing to a question to ponder is kind of what kind of world and human relationship to it do these videos create. And the last thing I'll draw attention is their pluralism. Okay, they privilege a plurality of perspectives, of species, of times, of places, and of media and forms. Okay, so there are a few threads which kind of draw this collection of short films together. I'll just briefly say something about Deep Weather and then something about Subatlantic. So Deep Weather from 2013. So this film kind of makes manifest, as you will know if you've already watched it, the connection between the extraction of oil from oil sands in Alberta in Canada, and the way in which on the other side of the world, Bangladeshi communities protect themselves against rising water levels. So first of all, in the first part of the video, it considers the environmental destruction wreaked by oil extraction in Alberta itself. National Geographic has called this form of oil extraction the world's most, or in fact this particular oil extraction in Canada, the world's most destructive oil operation. So it focuses on the destruction of the landscape, the pollution and the extinction of species that result from it in Alberta, before turning to the consequences of the warming climate caused by the burning of the extracted oil. So in this sense, it figures Earth as a kind of closed system in which activity in one area will create effects elsewhere, and it tries to render that tangible for us. And this is perhaps in contrast to some forms of eco-art which tend to sort of eschew globalization and focus most strongly on local ecosystems. Deep Weather, by contrast, widens its scope to attend to the interconnections of apparently separate and remote ecosystems. So moving on to Subatlantic from 2015, the title of this video, Subatlantic, refers to the climatic period that we're currently in, which is called the Subatlantic period, which began 2,500 years ago and is slightly cooler than the preceding Atlantic period. So the title refers to the natural cycles of the climate, which are obviously being affected, being changed by human activity. It also refers, so there's a sort of dual meaning, it refers also to the depths, the submerged parts of the Atlantic Ocean, which are explored in the video. And this one engages kind of fictional and narrative forms more obviously, because it features a fictional explorer of the Arctic landscape, a female scientist who sort of travels between different timescales of the subatlantic. So it's acknowledging the human, the role of the human in measuring and recording the environment. But at the same time, it affords agency and thought to the non-human elements, the water itself in particular, the ice, the meltwater. And so this video is kind of making visible, trying to make perceptible again here some of the invisible consequences of climate change. The way the oceans and streams, the way the ocean streams and the changes that are wrought in them, the way they're affected by the ice thaw. And it suggests that the physical and the chemical shifts that are occurring will in turn have a kind of impact on human subjectivity, on human thought, and produce changes in the patterns of human intellect. So it's exploring the relationship, as I sort of said in my little blurb that's on the website, between physical worlds and psychic worlds, between the human and the non-human. So I will finish there and pass back to Emily.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm just going to put on first Deep Weather. So I'll Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed those two, different, sort of broadly similarly themed videos. For some reason, mine is just coming back on again now. We'll kind of move straight into breakout groups if that's okay, and delve into some of the key questions that I posted in the chat, as well as other areas of interest that the facilitators draw attention to. Jess, would you mind popping us into the breakout rooms now for about 20 minutes or so, just to kind of get everybody's insights? Hi everyone. I hope that was really enjoyable to kind of get deeper into some of the themes. Perhaps if we just, what we did yesterday was to report back really on how the discussion flowed. So it would be great to hear, perhaps Debbie, do you want to start with your group?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, we talked about, I think we started off sort of talking about aesthetic choices. Annie was saying that the ice melting to her was rather beautiful, and she wondered whether the sort of the the beauty of it was really that effective in terms of its aims. We talked about the duality. Well, did we talk about duality? I don't know. I've written down duality. I'm not sure that was in relation. Oh yes, no, I'll come on to that. We talked about the upside down shots in sub-Atlantic. Thinking about why she'd chosen to do that. A couple of potential hypotheses that we talked about were the idea that the upside downness perhaps countered the beauty, because although the images are obviously very beautiful, we're seeing something which is upside down, a climatic system which is being turned upside down. So it introduced that note of dissonance even into something which is very beautiful. We talked about and this was sort of my idea really, I don't know whether anyone agreed with it, but the idea that we might read lots of articles about ice melting, but the close-ups on the melting ice have this kind of tactile quality which engages us with perhaps engages us a bit more, or allows us to kind of feel to feel this knowledge in a kind of embodied way that might resonate with people more. Numbers, I've written down numbers, can't remember what that was in relation to. Oh, Annie was talking about the red island, and she found that the most affecting, I think, was that right, Annie? You sort of found that the most affecting part of the film. It evoked something to do with fire or blood to you, and because it was more, perhaps because it was a bit more jarring, it was a bit more of an upsetting image somehow aesthetically, that kind of made it more compelling within the kind of the aims of perhaps a kind of an eco film or video. What else did we talk about? We talked about we talked about a few other things about to do with the gentleness of the voice, the gentleness of the whispering voice, the spooky quality of the whispering voice, the ways in which urgency was communicated. So Kexin felt that the kind of the constant focus on the melting ice in sub-Atlantic kind of gave it this urgency, this kind of urgent quality. And we ended up by contrasting or thinking about the effectiveness of this form of art communication on this subject. Annie felt that Annie sort of felt that the kind of the conventional sort of eco shock approach might be kind of bashing you over the head with really awful facts and terrifying statistics was actually more effective ultimately than this sort of thing. Kexin felt that that this kind of that Beeman's kind of work gives the viewer more autonomy because it's less didactic, obviously, and perhaps in that sense it's more I'm not sure whether you were saying it was more effective or not, but it certainly gives the viewer more autonomy and freedom for interpretation and perhaps potentially action. So I'll end on that.
Brilliant, fantastic. That sounds like a brilliant discussion. Lorena, how about you? How did your group get on?
So I was with Marika. So Marika, if you want to add anything to what I say, just feel free to come in. And it was quite interesting. I really liked the way that she, the way that she described the films, and she was saying that the films break boundaries between imagination and science, creating a more holistic approach. I really liked that description. And we were talking quite a lot about deep weather and how the two territories or the two spaces where the film is shot are viewed from different angles. So you have kind of aerial view through satellite images or drones at the beginning. And then the second part starts almost through the sea level. And then you get into, you get into land, but still the camera is always very low, apart from when you are seeing all the people, the collective effort of people working, which gives also like this sense of urgency in a different way. We were talking about the multi-dimensional aspects of her film. So how she uses, we have image, we have text, her voice, sound, and also very different types of sound, whether diegetic sound or sound effects that kind of unsettle and create some sort of dissonance. So that's interesting. We talk about how these conjunction of environments could be read in kind of power in relations as well. So the first world exploiting natural resources, and then how that affects Bangladesh, who is a like poor country, and how poor people who live in already difficult conditions have to face these new challenges. But also like the power between human and nature. What else did we say? I was just going to add to what Debbie was saying about this upside down image. The title of Subatlantic has this mirror effect as well. So I was thinking it has some sort of a connection with reflection, or I don't know, like I don't know how to read that, but I found that interesting. So yeah, I think that's it, unless Marika wants to add anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add just to that first point, this kind of like multi-dimensional thing of how it draws together scientific fact and as well as kind of drawing on the imagination or playing on this kind of idea of appealing to the kind of collective imagination. How it reminded me of Joseph Beuys's work and the idea of kind of breaking down these barriers between the language of natural sciences and kind of ideas of higher forms of rationality being inspiration and intuition, and also this idea of making work that's kind of, it was so physically stimulating, like it made me think I could imagine it being projected in a big installation room or something, because there was something about the sound and it made a kind of whole sculptural performance. And I think that's made, for me, where the real power of it came from was the way it collected all these different aspects that felt like it played on such a richness of kind of, it was like human communication through every different form. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. They're kind of really making the most of all the different senses, and like Debbie was saying as well, kind of almost a tactile quality to it, and a kind of embodied response that it's sort of enabling. That's, yeah, brilliant. And apparently Debbie's just said in the chat that she does also do lots of installations, so we'll have to go and look up those and see if we can make it to them. Brilliant. Thank you, that group. That sounds fantastic. And how about Jenny Rushworth? You were in another group as well.
Hi. Yeah, we had a really great group, because we had there were 4 of us, and we had someone who's a medical anthropologist who is also a photographer. Yes, I am just starting my video. It's very hard to take notes when you've got a Dachshund lying on your lap, but he's having his midday snooze, so there he is. Yeah, we had a medical anthropologist who's also a photographer. We had a student from the Slade School, and we had someone who's an information technologist, so we had a really good discussion. And we found Debbie's introduction really, really helpful for sort of guiding that, especially in the first film, this idea of potentially about the closed system of the world. And we were very struck by that relationality between the 2 different populations. And I think also this idea of the human work that was going into it, on the one hand, to take out oil, working day and night, and on the other hand, also working day and night, but to sort of stop the sea, which seemed somehow futile, but also we felt a little bit of a sense of optimism of, if a community comes together, it can achieve something. So we were trying to decide if our optimism was misplaced, or, you know, if we were sort of overly reading that. It did seem like it was futile, but also, is there a possibility for collaboration or activism? And I think what connected all our responses really was this sense of, you watch the videos and you feel like you want to do something, you want to know what to do. You kind of feel, yeah, a mixture of helpless but also inspired and motivated. So we all sort of shared that feeling, which also led some of our discussion to be about the distribution of the films, actually, which maybe Debbie could say more about, because we had this kind of concern about what I would call preaching to the converted or to the choir, that if you click on a video like that, or if you come to one of these events, then you have a certain type of response already, or a certain type of background and interest. And so how can we, if the aim with these films is to combine a kind of information and knowledge and science, but in a more attractive format, and we were also struck by that question of beauty, and is it acceptable to enjoy these videos? We talked about that for a bit, should we enjoy this end of the world video or not? But we'd like to know more about the distribution. I guess because I'm not really a film person, I'm a literature person, I was asking people also what they thought the sort of difference between doing this in a film rather than doing it in a short story, say, was. So I heard a lot about how film is immediate, it's accessible, it's easy to distribute, it's easy to consume, and that and it also that the visual images are somehow much more powerful, memorable, or compelling than text. And I found this all terrible for literature, but I struggled to answer back to that, so I'm still thinking about that. But what I thought at least was that there is an emphasis on text in these videos because of obviously the voiceover, and then the fact that the text is then printed and written on it, and that you get a kind of, they almost feel like short stories in a way, actually. So then I thought maybe it's a sort of false dichotomy between film and narrative. So yeah, I was quite intimidated in my group, actually, because I think that Anna Maria is going to write the blog for this event, so she can correct what I have omitted, or she can control the discussion ultimately. It's not me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant. I like your response. I think in some ways it's a matter of your kind of personal choices and what impacts you, because I mean, I'm a very text-based person, so I did notice that I was focusing, completely on the text the first time I watched Subatlantic. So, and then I sort of had to force myself to pay attention to the images as well. So I think it depends. And I think they do have different things to offer, perhaps in the way that they can interpolate people. And like you say, there are differences perhaps in distribution, although internet and open access do make a difference in terms of the reach of some of these things, which is great. Well, yeah, for the sake of time, I mean, I'll just resume what we talked about in my group, which and then try and connect it to some of the other comments that have been made. We had Stefano briefly, who had to go, but who I sort of gathered first impressions from him, and Iris, who had to go at 1. But Stefano said something similar to Annie, in that he was very mesmerized by Subatlantic, and sort of, you know, aesthetically found it absolutely mesmerizing and incredible. And in some ways, perhaps that did undermine the purpose if it was to sort of shock us into any kind of action. But on the other hand, you know, there was a rich narrative there that did sort of provide an arc of, you know, this is the way in which it's changing, and this is, and we do have to kind of face up to this reality. He said the other one, on the other hand, did actually provoke him to think more in terms of the ethics of the climate change phenomenon, and how the global north, actions in the global north, will disproportionately impact the equatorial zones, as it calls it. And in particular, here we see the effect on Bangladesh. So it was really interesting. He says she comes from the southeast of China, and they experience a lot of cyclones. So that was a really interesting insight. And she, in fact, used the word sublime to discuss the deep weather, saying that the sense of the resistance to the weather really, you know, made her feel that there was a community there, and there was a shared purpose, and that, you know, that optimism which Jenny was talking about, whether or not we're supposed to feel it. She, from the point of view of somebody who sort of has experience of this, felt that that was coming through. And so that's a really interesting point of view to have had shared, I thought. Then our other, so Natalie, who was in my landscape and the environment class last year, and who's come back to sort of get involved in this amazingly, is my sort of activist, you know, that is like the activist side of me, and really wanting to think about the reach and the overall effect of this form. And so we talked a bit together afterwards, after the others had gone, about, you know, the short form being in many ways making it more impactful. It has the potential to be shared, and people can, you know, see, really think like a short story, really think, you know, what is Beeman trying to do with this 10 minutes, and what's the narrative arc, and kind of, you know, it makes it in some ways accessible in ways that longer documentaries and films aren't, which is one of the positives of this form. How does it do what it wants to do sort of aesthetically? I think the two were very different, and we also talked about sound, as Lorena highlighted, this sort of use of diegetic sound in deep weather to really embed us in that community with, you know, not individualized voices, but the murmurings of their communication with each other, and their sort of muffled speakers coming through to embed us into that sort of world a bit more than in the, again, the mesmerizing Subatlantic, more being music sort of enchanting those images, which are already very aesthetically powerful, as we talked about, but the music adds to that sense of kind of enchantment in a way, or as Lorena said, or I think Debbie said, there is a defamiliarizing quality to those images and the way that they're played around with, and perhaps the sound also, you know, enhances a sort of defamiliarization of that, and a dissonance, rather than leading us to kind of accept it as a sort of straightforward narrative, which is seemingly one of the differences between the two. And then we also talked about the sort of the way that there are sort of strong links, we thought, between the opening sequence of the deep weather, in that there's that sort of unspoilt landscape, and then the machine in the middle of it, with the sort of narration about tar and how that's filtered and everything, into that sort of tar-like kind of, you know, tar-like residue of mud that they're having to load up these bags with, and those kinds of, there are a few sort of different, and that sort of empty landscape versus the first shot we have, which is a kind of wide angle shot of the people, a long shot of them moving backwards and forward, which really gives you a sense of the scale of the amount of people, of the constant flow of them having to basically deal with the impact of this sort of process of oil extraction that's happening in the global north. So we thought there were sort of many links that we could trace between them. Absolutely fascinating. And Natalie was really keen to know about, you know, the distribution of these films and the reach and impact. And so we were talking about, you know, again, the same thing that Jenny was touching on, the sort of preaching to the choir version of this. Does it have the power to get academics to be so fascinated by it that we sort of then reorientate our research to look at that kind of thing, as Debbie was sort of talking about, has happened in a way, or perhaps it was the activism that did it, and, you know, and then these provide a tool to think through the different ways of having impact and aesthetically engaging people. So, and, you know, engaging them to activism as well. So yeah, I suppose we have come to the end of the time, and I personally would be able to talk about this all day, but for the sake of everybody's timetables, I think we do have to wrap up. Debbie, did you want to say any final comments?
No, not really. I mean, in terms of various people have asked about the distribution. I mean, I don't know a huge amount about this actually, apart from the fact that it that quite a lot of her work is open access, like these 2 videos, and she does a lot of work with art museums. So, you know, a lot of her films are being screened probably to the choir in art museums. So I mentioned in the chat she's got an exhibition on at the moment at the Museum of Modern Art, I think it is in Nice, where she's screening the film I mentioned, Forest Law, alongside an installation relating to that topic as well. So yeah, and so her work seems to be sort of financed by universities and art institutes mainly, and the film Forest Law, which is not open access, otherwise I would have suggested it for this session, which is really, really interesting, and it's a longer piece on the Ecuadorian Amazon. Sorry, my cat's just decentering the human there, or somehow getting in on the action. I've had to acquire that via Video Data Bank, who yeah, and it's extremely expensive and stuff. So yeah, it's I don't really know. Yeah, I know. I was quite pleased when my cat popped in, because you had your dog. So it's quite nice. Yeah, that's kind of as far as as much as I know about it, but certainly we'll look into it more.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think I do share these videos with people who you think might find them interesting. That's one way of kind of spreading the word about her work, and you know, enabling her to have that impact in terms of the, you know, sadly the data of people viewed, and if we can get those videos circulating even further, that might further impact. And yeah, it remains to say really thank you so much to everyone, and thank you, Debbie, for that absolutely fantastic introduction to the film. And sorry that we didn't have time to sort of hear from everyone. The nature of the, you know, time slots is a shame that we can't talk about this. But if you are interested in the ongoing bigger questions of impact, etc., do come along tomorrow and ask questions and get involved, because we want to keep thinking about how we can bridge, you know, overcome the boundaries between art and science, as she's trying to make us do, and in our disciplines as well. So thank you to Lorena and also Jenny for facilitating, and Jess, of course, for the technical help and facilitation, and keeping me you know, organized with the event as well. So thank you everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who came along. It was absolutely brilliant.